I used to think betrayal would come with warning signs, raised voices, slammed doors, confessions through tears. I never imagined it would come quietly, like a draft, slipping through a crack in the window, so faint I mistook it for my imagination, until the cold settled in my bones. My name is Isabella, though for most of my adult life, people called me Isa. I was 35 the year my world cracked open, but it started long before that, back when I was just a girl who believed love meant endurance, sacrifice, and swallowing your pain so the people around you wouldn't choke on it. I had been married 12 years when I discovered the truth about my husband. 12 years of cooking his meals, ironing his shirts, hosting his friends, and pretending I didn't notice the late nights, the faint perfume clinging to his collar, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes anymore. I had learned to live with suspicion the way some people live with a chronic ache in their hip or back. You learn to move carefully to make excuses to convince yourself the pain is normal. But on the week of my 35th birthday, the ache sharpened into something undeniable. He'd left his email open on our shared computer, something he never did. And there it was, glowing against the dark of the screen, a message from her. Phoebe. I still remember her name burning into me like a brand. Can't wait for this weekend. Once she's out of the picture, we can finally stop sneaking around. The words made my skin prickle as if my body already knew the danger before my mind could process it. The thread went back years. Years of lies, of hotel confirmations, of photographs I can never unsee. I sat there frozen, scrolling with hands that didn't feel like my own. It wasn't just cheating, it was a life he had built in secret while I scrubbed our floors and smiled at company dinners. When I heard his key in the door that night, I closed the browser and pretended nothing had changed. I kissed him with the same practiced affection I had offered for more than a decade, and he smiled at me like he hadn't just ripped out the floor beneath my life. Over dinner, he told me he'd be working late again, and I nodded, swirling pasta on my fork, wondering how many of those nights had been spent in her bed. I couldn't sleep. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, the rise and fall of his breathing a cruel rhythm, and asked myself questions that had no answers. When had I become invisible? Was there something in me so easy to discard? But the longer I stared at the dark, the clearer it became. This wasn't about my worth. It was about his betrayal. And I deserved more. The very next day, fate peeled back another layer of cruelty. I came home early and found his car already parked outside. He wasn't supposed to be there. I slipped into our neighbor's driveway, heart hammering, and crept toward the house. From the side entrance, I heard voices on the patio, his laugh, hers, and two of his oldest friends. I crouched by the dining room window, peering in. They were drinking bourbon I had given him for Christmas. They were laughing, their words slurring together, but one phrase cut through with sobering clarity. The birthday surprise. My stomach lurched as I listened. Blindfold me. Drive me around. Leave me stranded at an abandoned gas station. A prank, they called it. A joke. Except it wasn't just about humiliating me. It was about breaking me so I would be easier to discard. I watched through the glass as Phoebe slid her hand onto his thigh, as he kissed her in the backyard I had poured my soul into, and I felt something shatter, not just love, not just trust, but the illusion that I was safe in the life I had built. That night I made my choice. While he snored beside me, I lay awake with tears soaking the pillow. I had been the good wife, the loyal friend, the woman who stayed quiet to keep the peace. But I would not be their punchline. I would not be the gullible fool who cried at the gas station and crawled back home to beg for scraps. If they wanted to blindfold me and drop me at the edge of nowhere, I would turn that nowhere into my escape. By morning, I had a plan. The morning of my 35th birthday felt like walking across a frozen lake. Every step cautious, every breath shallow, terrified the ice might crack and reveal the dark water beneath. I made breakfast, like always, pancakes with strawberries and whipped cream, his favorite. He kissed my cheek, smug and oblivious, and whispered, "Happy birthday, babe. I've got something special planned." I forced a smile. I can't wait. Inside, my heart was a storm. By 11, the doorbell rang. His friends Finn and Luca stood grinning on the porch. They handed me a small gift bag. Inside was a silk scarf, delicate and expensive. I knew instantly what it was meant for. The blindfold. It's beautiful, I said, fingers grazing the fabric. Why don't you try it on? Luca suggested, his eyes gleaming with cruel anticipation. I turned to my husband and held the scarf out. Would you do the honors, honey? He tied it tight around my eyes, whispering against my ear. Ready for the best birthday surprise of your life? Yes, I breathed, steady as stone, absolutely ready. The car ride was long. They laughed and joked as if I wasn't there, as if I was already erased. I counted the minutes, 47 in total, mapping their cruelty in silence. When the car finally stopped, I smelled it before I saw it. Old gasoline, dust, abandonment, the gas station. They spun me around, yanked off the blindfold, and shouted, "Surprise!" Their laughter echoed off the empty building like hyenas circling prey. I played my part, confused, frightened, pleading. "You can't be serious," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Don't worry," Finn grinned. "Someone drives by eventually." "Find your way home, Isa," my husband added coldly. "We'll see you whenever." The car door slammed. Their laughter faded into the distance. Dust swirled in the silence they left behind. And then I exhaled. I checked my watch. 11:47 a.m. My Uber would arrive in 13 minutes. I slipped behind the building, pulled off my boots, and retrieved the emergency cash I had hidden days earlier. I swapped my birthday outfit for jeans, a t-shirt, and a baseball cap. By the time the blue sedan pulled up, I was no longer a stranded wife. I was a woman escaping. "Mrs. Reynolds," the driver called. "That's me," I said, stepping out from the shadows with a steady smile. We drove straight to a pawn shop downtown. I removed the jewelry that once symbolized promises that were never kept. My engagement ring, my wedding band, my grandmother's pearls. They glittered on the glass counter under the harsh light as I whispered, "I need to know what these are worth." The old man studied them, studied me, then quietly offered more than I expected. $7,000. Enough to start over. Then, almost like he could read the desperation etched into my skin, he pushed something else across the counter. A small handgun. "A woman traveling alone should have protection," he said softly. I stared at it. My reflection warped in the dark metal. I had never held a gun in my life, but in that moment, I understood it wasn't just about protection. It was about power. Power I had been stripped of for years. Power I was reclaiming piece by piece. That night, I sat at a bus station with a ticket to New York clenched in my hand. From there, a flight to Paris. I had chosen the city because it seemed untouchable, like a dream on the other side of the ocean. My new name, my maiden name, was printed on the boarding pass, Isabella Chin. As the bus rumbled out of town, the streets of my old life blurred into darkness. Relief washed over me, raw and overwhelming. I wasn't broken, I wasn't discarded, I was free. But freedom, I soon learned, was terrifying. In Paris, I rented a shabby room in Montmartre with peeling paint and a bed that squeaked when I breathed. At night, I sat by the window listening to the hum of the city, the accordion music drifting from the streets, the smell of bread rising from the bakery below. I had escaped, yes, but I was broke, alone, and nearly invisible in a country whose language I barely spoke. Some nights I woke drenched in sweat, certain my husband had tracked me down, certain he would appear in the doorway with that mocking smirk. But then I would hear laughter from the street below, pure and unbroken, and remind myself I was an ocean away. I had no roadmap, only grit, and somewhere in the marrow of my bones the certainty that I had been underestimated for far too long. The first weeks in Paris were brutal. I stretched the pawnshop money as far as I could, living on cheap bread and fruit from street vendors, counting coins before daring to step into a cafe. My French was pitiful, halting phrases and butchered pronunciations that drew smirks from waiters and sighs from landlords. Still, I repeated words into the cracked bathroom mirror each night, clinging to the sound of my own determination. I told myself I hadn't come this far to crumble. At first, I searched for work, blindly walking into shops, offices, anywhere with a help wanted sign taped to the glass. Each rejection pressed against the fragile shell of my hope, but I kept going. Eventually, I found myself at a small employment agency. The woman behind the desk, silver-haired and severe, squinted at my paperwork. Your French is minimal, she said, her accent wrapping around each syllable like barbed wire. I'm learning, I replied, even though the words felt clumsy on my tongue. She pursed her lips. There is one position. Temporary. Receptionist for Lambert Financial. They need someone who speaks English for international clients. I took the job without hesitation. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a lifeline. The office was modest, tucked inside a plain building in the 8th arrondissement. My desk was the first thing clients saw when they walked in. Every morning, I practiced my script, Bonjour Lambert Financial. Comment, puis-je vous aider? I stumbled at first, earning sharp looks from my supervisor, Giselle, but over time she softened. She began to teach me during lunch breaks, correcting my grammar while I helped polish her English reports. Day by day, word by word, Paris became less foreign. It was during one of those long afternoons sorting through invoices that I spotted a duplicate payment of nearly 40,000 euros. I hesitated, pulse quickening. I was just the receptionist, not my place. But something inside me refused to let it slide. I knocked on the founder's office door and explained what I had found. His annoyance shifted to interest, then to something I hadn't seen in years: respect. The next day, I was promoted to administrative assistant. The work came naturally. Numbers made sense to me in a way people never had. I devoured reports, memorized patterns, spotted risks others overlooked. My supervisors noticed. Before long, I wasn't just filing papers, I was quietly influencing decisions. Still at night, the ghosts came. I'd jolt awake from nightmares of my husband's laughter at the gas station, his hand guiding the blindfold over my eyes. I'd sit trembling in my tiny apartment, whispering to myself that he couldn't touch me here, that I had crossed an ocean for this chance to rebuild. It was on a rainy Tuesday when my path shifted again. I had been preparing a conference room when I saw an investment strategy laid out on the table. They were advising a client to pour money into a telecom sector I knew was collapsing under regulatory pressure. I shouldn't have spoken, but I did. I told them the timing was wrong, that there were signs of instability. The room fell silent. I wanted to melt into the floor. Instead, the founder pulled out the very report I had mentioned when I wasn't even supposed to have read, and studied me with a new kind of scrutiny. That evening, he called me into his office. "How much do you know about financial markets?" he asked. More than a receptionist, should I admitted, my heart racing. Less than I want to. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Would you like more responsibility?" And just like that, the door opened. I began working as a junior analyst, combing through portfolios, spotting opportunities others missed. It felt like waking up after years of sleepwalking. For the first time since I'd left America, I wasn't surviving, I was thriving. And then Tanner Reed walked into my life. He was the CEO of a vast shipping empire, tall and composed, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that seemed to pierce right through numbers to the truths they hid. He was our firm's newest client, and from the start he treated me differently. Not like a receptionist, not even like a junior analyst, but like someone worth listening to. I helped him restructure his European investments. He questioned me sharply, tested every assumption, but when the markets buckled months later and my analysis proved right, he didn't just thank me. He asked for me specifically on every project. Before long, I was spending more time in his Paris apartment than in my office, spread out over polished wood tables with reports and projections, our conversations flowing late into the night. He was relentless, brilliant, but also steady in a way that disarmed me. Unlike my husband, Tanner didn't laugh at my ideas, he leaned in. He wanted more. The crash of 2023 hit like an earthquake, sending companies scrambling. Tanner's board wanted to sell assets, cut losses. But I told him the opposite. Acquire. Buy while everyone else panicked. It was the boldest thing I'd ever said to a man of his stature, and I half expected him to fire me on the spot. Instead, he studied me for a long time, then nodded. "If you're wrong, Isabella, we lose everything." "I'm not wrong," I whispered. And I wasn't. 6 months later, his company's value had tripled. The financial world called it genius. Tanner called it partnership. And somewhere between boardrooms and late-night strategy sessions, I began to feel something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Not fear, not survival, but the stirrings of trust. It happened slowly, almost imperceptibly, the way frost spreads across a window pane in the dead of winter. Tanner and I had spent countless evenings buried in spreadsheets, sipping black coffee that turned into shared dinners, then into conversations that stretched well past midnight. At first, it was professional respect, cautious and boundaried. But there were moments, tiny electric moments, when his eyes lingered too long, when my laughter escaped too easily, when the air between us carried the weight of things unsaid. I resisted. God, how I resisted. After all, I had built my escape on steel walls. I had sworn I'd never need a man again, never tether my worth to someone else's presence or absence. And yet, Tanner wasn't my husband. He wasn't a man who thrived on control or cruelty. He asked, he listened, he didn't demand my silence, he invited my voice. The night it shifted, truly shifted. We were in Tokyo for a shipping consortium. He was magnetic that week, commanding in boardrooms, calm, amidst chaos, and quietly powerful in a way that made others lean toward him without even realizing it. After a triumphant agreement was signed, we found ourselves on the rooftop garden of our hotel, the city lights sprawling like constellations at our feet. "You should be celebrating," I told him. "Some victories," he said softly, "feel hollow without someone to share them with." Something inside me cracked. For 3 years I had lived with the echo of abandonment, with the laughter of men who found my pain entertaining. And now here was a man who looked at me like I was not a joke, not a burden, not invisible but essential. "I've spent years learning to trust my judgment again," I confessed, my voice trembling. "And what does your judgment tell you now?" "That fear is a poor foundation for decisions." His hand brushed mine on the railing. Warm, steady, not possessive but offering. "I would never want to be another thing you fear, Isabella." For once I didn't retreat. 6 months later, in a modest Paris courthouse, Tanner and I stood side by side. No lavish spectacle, no glittering crowd. Just two witnesses, a simple vow and rings we had chosen together. Mine wasn't the sharp, flawless diamond my ex had once presented with hollow promises. It was a twisted band of gold, imperfect, unique, resilient like me. I became Isabella Reed that day. Not a discarded wife, not a woman running from ghosts, but a woman walking forward, chosen and choosing in return. The years that followed were a blur of growth and healing. Tanner and I split our lives between Paris and New York, building not just his empire, but a partnership rooted in trust. I maintained my role at Lambert Financial, but worked almost exclusively with Tanner's ventures, a quiet force behind strategies that reshaped the industry. Yet the past has a way of circling back, doesn't it? It was an ordinary afternoon in Tanner's Manhattan office when the email arrived. He scanned it, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. "Something interesting," he murmured. "A mid-sized American construction company seeking financing for expansion. Reynolds Construction." The name hit me like a slap. My throat closed, my pulse thundering in my ears. Reynolds. My ex-husband's family business, the one he had inherited and I suspected mismanaged into the ground. Tanner noticed the blood drain from my face. "Isabella, do you know them?" I could have lied. I almost did. But we had built our marriage on honesty, and I refused to plant a seed of secrecy. "Reynolds was my married name," I said at last. "Emmett Reynolds was my ex-husband." The only sign of Tanner's surprise was a faint lift of his brow. "The husband you left after the incident?" "Yes." My voice felt raw. "I haven't seen or spoken to him since that day." Tanner turned the screen toward me. The request was desperate: claims of overseas contracts, promises of growth if only they could secure financing. I scanned the numbers, the vague language and bitterness rose in my throat. "There probably aren't any contracts," I said flatly. "Emmett always had grand plans, but no follow-through." Tanner leaned back. "We can decline the meeting. There are better opportunities." Part of me longed for that, to let them sink, to erase his existence from my orbit entirely. But another part, the part that had built herself from ashes, whispered something else. "No," I said, surprising myself. "Take the meeting. I want to be there." Tanner studied me with careful eyes. "For revenge." I shook my head. "For closure. To prove to myself that he has no power over me anymore." The day of the meeting I dressed with deliberate precision, a tailored charcoal suit, pearl earrings Tanner had given me, and an updo that spoke of quiet authority. As I studied my reflection, I realized I didn't look like the woman who once cried herself to sleep beside a man plotting her humiliation. I looked like someone entirely new. Second thoughts, Tanner asked, adjusting his tie beside me. No, I whispered steady, just preparing myself. And when we walked into that sleek midtown conference room, I felt the weight of the moment. I had left blindfolded, abandoned in dust and laughter. Now I was here ready to face the man who had once believed I was disposable. The door opened and I heard his voice before I saw his face. That voice I had dreamed of, it cursed it, run from it, and now it was here echoing through a room that belonged to me, not him. Thanks for seeing us, Mr. Reed. I'm Emmett Reynolds, and this is my financial advisor, Marcus Clean. I didn't look up right away. I let him sit, let him lay out his carefully rehearsed pitch about global opportunities and temporary setbacks. My fingers moved calmly across the keyboard, my heart steady in my chest. Only when the silence beckoned did I finally lift my eyes. Recognition didn't strike him immediately. 3 years had carved new lines into me, strength, where weakness had lived, steadiness, where fear once ruled. But then it hit. His gaze locked on mine, and all the color drained from his face. Aisa, he stammered. I smiled faintly. Isabella Reed, I corrected, Chief Strategic Advisor for Atlantic Meridian Shipping, and Mr. Reed's wife. The silence between us was heavy, electric. His advisor shifted awkwardly, looking from him to me as if trying to make sense of the impossible. Tanner, ever composed, broke the tension with ease. Small world, he said smoothly. Now regarding your proposal. Business continued, though Emmett was barely present. His eyes flicked to me, disbelief etched into every twitch of his jaw. I slid the documents across the table, pointing out flaws in their financials, highlighting risks they had tried to bury. My tone was professional, even detached. I wanted him to hear my voice, steady, unshaken. But then he cracked. You disappeared, he blurted, cutting through Marcus's explanation. We filed a missing person report. The police searched. There was an investigation. For 3 years I thought you might be dead. How unfortunate for you, I said evenly. That must have been distressing. His composure shattered. Not a word, not a trace. And now you're just someone else's wife. I leaned forward slightly. I am my own person first. A woman who rebuilt herself after you left her blindfolded at a gas station as a birthday prank. A woman who deserved better than to be the joke in her husband's story. He flinched, his face twisting. It was just, don't. My voice was sharp, final. Don't you dare diminish what you did. Don't you dare excuse it. The room fell silent. Tanner's presence at my side was like an anchor, steady, unwavering. Emmett looked at me like a man watching his own ruin unfold. Why did you agree to see me? He whispered at last, hollow. Not for revenge, I said. Not to gloat. I came to prove to myself that I could look you in the eyes and feel nothing. And I don't. You don't own me anymore. You don't even matter. The truth of it settled over me like a blessing. The years of rage, grief, humiliation, they didn't vanish, but they loosened their grip. I hadn't come here for him. I had come here for me. I closed my laptop, stood, and extended my hand. Goodbye, Emmett. He stared at it, stunned, before his eyes flicked up to mine. For a fleeting second, I saw recognition dawn, the realization of what he had thrown away, the life he could have had, if cruelty hadn't been easier than love. But recognition was not redemption. Tanner and I walked him to the elevator, the final tether of my past severing with every step. The doors closed and I exhaled. For the first time, I wasn't haunted. I was free. The sweetest victory wasn't revenge. It wasn't watching his company collapse or his face twist in regret. The sweetest victory was standing tall in the life I had built with my own hands, choice by careful choice, day by determined day. I had been left at a gas station to feel powerless. I had sailed across an ocean to reclaim myself. And in the end, I discovered the greatest power wasn't in making him pay, it was in no longer needing him to. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever survived betrayal, rebuilt yourself from ashes, or simply needed proof that healing is possible, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, share your journey, and let others know they're not alone. And if my words touched you, please, like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who might need it today. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's freedom.